The alley was thick with smoke and shadows. You had become familiar with the chaos of Zaron over time. It was hard not to when your work brought you here so often, chasing down one criminal or another. This time, though, the stakes were higher. Because, well, you had been assigned to Jinx, the infamous blue-haired menace of the Undersea. Following rumors of her location, you'd wound up finding your way through a maze of winding alleys and run-down buildings. Just as you were starting to doubt the information, a small flash of blue caught your eye. You turned sharply to see her standing there, leaning casually against the wall, her eyes glittering with mischief. She looked almost relaxed, her braids swinging over one shoulder, a half smirk playing on her lips. "Well, well, well," she said, crossing her arms as if she was expecting you. "They sent you." I thought that sounded someone a little bit scarier. "Come quietly," you said, trying to sound as steady as possible. Being her grin, it made it hard to focus. "This doesn't have to get messy," you warned. She laughed, a wild, almost unhinged sound that echoed off the brick walls. "Oh, I hope it gets messy." Without another word, she pushed off the wall and darted down the alley. You sprinted after her, your heart racing. She was faster than you expected, slipping through narrow gaps and over obstacles as if she'd done it 1,000 times. You'd been training for this. But she moved with such reckless confidence that it was hard to match. And just as you were gaining on her, she slid through an abandoned warehouse door. You followed, scanning the dark, cavernous space. Pipes and crates were scattered around, casting a strange shadow on the dim light. Somewhere in the darkness, you heard her laugh again. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," she called out, voice echoing off the walls. "Why do you even care? What's one more criminal and pit lover?" "Maybe I don't like people who play with others' lives for fun," you shot back. "Is that what you think?" Her tone was mocking, but there was a hardness behind it. "You have no idea." Suddenly she leapt down from the high stack of crates, landing just a few feet away. Her smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of almost vulnerability. For a brief moment, you saw something in her eyes, a glimmer of something like pain or regret, but just as quickly as it came, it left and was replaced by her usual bravo. She raised her weapon with a playful, dangerous smile. "Catch me if you can, hero." You lost track of her after that night, but her taunts haunted you. Every patrol, every mission brought you back to the thought of that last encounter. She wasn't just some mindless criminal. She was someone who'd been hurt, someone fighting her own battles. Then, one night you found her again. She was cornered by people, a group of thugs in the alley, people who didn't care about anything, just their own power. You watched, unseen as she tried to fight them off, her strength faltering, but she was skilled, no doubt, but even she had limits. Before you knew what you were even doing, you stepped in. "Hey!" you shouted, drawing at the attention of the thugs. "Come on, back off." They turned towards you, sizing you up, but with a manage of surprise on your side. You managed to drive them off. When they finally scattered, you turned back to Jinx. She was leaning against a wall, breathing heavily. Her gaze was unreadable. "Why did you do that?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "Seemed like the right thing to do," you replied simply. She scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "What? Try to play hero? I don't need saving." "I didn't say you did," you replied, feeling a flicker of frustration at her resistance. "Maybe you don't have to do everything alone." For a moment she looked like she wanted to say something else, but instead she just shook her head and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty alley. After that night, your encounter with the Jinx became less hostile. She'd show up unannounced, usually with a smirk and a sarcastic comment, but you started to see through her little bravo each time. She let more of herself slip through, and before you knew it, you found yourself looking forward to seeing her, despite the trouble she always seemed to bring. One evening, you met her at some run-down bar in Zarn. She was nursing a drink, and her gaze distant. "You again," she muttered. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I thought we were past surprises," you replied, taking a seat across from her. She gave you a half smile. "You're stubborn, you know that." "So are you," you shot back. "But maybe that's why we keep running into each other." She rolled her eyes, but she didn't argue. Instead, she leaned back, studying you with an intensity that made you pause, quicken. "What's your deal anyway?" she asked finally. "Why are you so nice to me?" You hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I think you're more than what people see, or than what people say about you. And I know what it's like to be misunderstood." She laughed, a bitter sound. "Misunderstood?" It's putting it lightly. For a moment you sat in silence, the weight of her words settling beneath you. In that quiet, something shifted. The animosity that was once defined your relationship faded, replaced by something fragile and understanding. But just when things started to get good, the enforcers began to suspect something. They started asking you questions, pressuring you for information. You felt trapped, torn between your loyalty and the strange bond you'd formed with the girl. When she found out, she was furious. "You told them about me?" she shouted, voice shaking with anger. Why?" "Jinx, I didn't tell them anything," you protested. They're watching me, okay? I'm in a bad spot here." "Yeah, well, welcome to the club," she snapped, turning on her heel. "Please, listen, you said, trying to grab her arm gently. "I didn't mean to betray you. I would never do that." She hesitated, glancing down at your hand on her arm. Slowly, she looked up at you. "I don't trust easily," she whispered, "and I can't afford to lose any more people." "I know," you replied, your heart breaking at the vulnerability. "I won't let them." As he held Jinx, a warmth flooded through you. Surprising, given how far the both of you had come from where you met, but the moment didn't last long. She pulled back, her eyes flickering with suspicion, as if she wondered why she'd let her guard down, or even for a second. "We're just gonna get each other killed," she muttered, looking away, but her voice was softer, almost resigned. "Maybe," you admitted, "but at least we'd be in it together." She rolled her eyes. There was a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Great. Just what I need, someone to share my spectacularity, chaos, end with." Despite her sarcasm, she didn't pull away this time. You both stood there in the dim light of the alley, closer than you'd ever been physically and emotionally. You could see the battle scars she wore, the dark circles beneath their eyes and the trace of the old wounds, both visible and invisible. She was fragile beneath her facade, fighting her own demons, just as you suspected all along. Over the next few weeks, you decided that your only refuge in life that you knew, in the brief moments of your meetings, it was like the line between friend and foe started to blur. She let you see sides of her that she'd hidden from everyone else, the reckless laughter and the sleepless nights and the rare moment when her guard slipped. It was genuine. It was raw. There was pain. And you, in turn, found yourself confiding in her in things you never told anybody in the past. The shame of your own past mistakes and the moments that you doubted your duty. You knew it was risky, but you couldn't bring yourself to care. Piltover was closing in. The enforcers grew insistent in their questioning, and you began to suspect they were following you. You had to be careful. One misstep, and they would find her. You hadn't told her, but you knew she was growing suspicious. She could feel the tension growing. One night, just as you were about to leave, she stopped you, grabbing your hand before you could slip away into the shadows. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why do you risk everything for me?" You swallowed, meeting her gaze. Because I don't think I could stand losing you, you said, the words slipping out before you could stop. Not now. She looked at you, her eyes wide, with something that almost looked like fear. For the first time, you saw a crack in her armor, a flash of vulnerability in her hesitation. Slowly, she reached up and brushed her finger against your cheek, her touch softer than you ever thought it would be possible to be. You're a fool, she whispered, but there was a hint of tenderness in her voice that made your heart skip a beat. Then I guess I'm your fool, you replied, daring to smile, even in the face of everything. For the first time, she didn't argue. She let her hand linger in that fragile, unspoken moment. You'd feel the weight of her trust, a rare gift she'd never given anyone before. But it didn't last. A week later, you received orders for a mission that made your blood run cold. The Piltover wanted Jinx gone, no matter what. They didn't specify why. It was just one more order among many. You knew if you didn't comply, they'd send someone else who would. You had no choice but to warn her. When you met her that night, her face hardened as you told her. She didn't shout, didn't throw accusations. Instead, she just looked at you with a quiet, "Guess we always knew it would end like this," she said, her voice carrying a shadow of the bravo she usually carried. "Come with me," you blurted out, reaching over to her hand. "We could leave, the Piltover ends on, and just go somewhere, anywhere. We don't have to look over our shoulder." She looked at you. Truly looked at you for a moment. You thought she might say yes, but then her gaze shifted to the rooftops of Zon, to the city she'd fought for, and she shook her head. "I can't leave," she whispered. "This place, it's a part of me." You both stood there in silence, knowing your paths were breaking. No matter how much you wanted to fight it, she gave you a soft smile, the kind that made your heart ache. "Thank you for everything," she said quietly, and with that she was gone, disappearing into the shadows. Weeks went by where you didn't hear from her. You returned to your duties, feeling emptier than ever. But every time you passed by a dark alleyway, every time you saw a flash of blue in the distance, your heart would race, hoping it was her. One night, you were patrolling on the outskirts of Zon. When you saw her again, she was standing there, waiting for you, her eyes shining with that old, dangerous spark. "You miss me?" Your tone was teasing, but there was a softness there. Without a word, you pulled her into an embrace, holding her as if you'd never let go. And this time she didn't pull away. In those quiet, stolen moments, it didn't matter whether you were enemies, allies, or lovers. But after that night, you and Jinx found a fragile kind of peace, an unspoken agreement that bound you two together despite the risk. Piltover's enforcers grew suspicious of your absence once more, but you've managed to deflect their questions just enough to avoid raising alarms. Jinx, meanwhile, seemed to take the new arrangement in stride, showing up unannounced but always with her guard up, watching you as if you might vanish one moment. But one night she didn't come. You tried to convince yourself it was nothing, that maybe she'd just been caught up in another one of her silly little schemes. Maybe even she decided she was better off on her own once again. But the days passed, and then those days turned into weeks, and each day without her warrior resolve. You felt an emptiness that settled into your chest, a sense of dread that something was very wrong this time. Then a message arrived, smuggled to you by one of the Zon street kids, crumpled up and barely legible. You unfolded it with trembling hands, the words scrawled into Jinx's unmistakable hazard handwriting. "Piltover caught me. Might be the end, hero. If you're still dumb enough to care, you know where to find me." You barely finished reading before you bolted for the holding cells beneath the Piltover's law enforcement headquarters. Slipping past the guards with a mix of stealth and sheer determination, you found her in the damp, dimly lit cell, chained to a wall with bruises on her wrists and a defiance blazing in her eyes. "Thought you'd be smart enough to stay away," she said, her voice laced with both sarcasm and relief. "I was never that smart," you replied, giving her a wary smile as you began working on her chains. She watched you in silence, the bravo slipping from her face just for a moment. "You shouldn't have come. They'll lock you up too, or worse." It doesn't matter," you said, freeing the weight of your decision. "I couldn't leave you here," As you freed her wrists, you took her head up, guiding her. She followed without hesitation, her steps light and careful, just as yours were, as you made your way through the building's maze of corridors. But just as you reached the exit, a shout echoed down the hall. Enforcers. You grabbed Jinx's hand, pulling her into a sprint as they chased in, your footsteps echoing through the metal-lined walls. Guess it wouldn't be a real escape without some theatrics, she muttered.